Hello, let me introduce myself. I'm María Inés Baqué. I'm the Government Transformation Lead for Latin America, Canada and Caribbean region. And my role in AWS is to help governments in accelerate their digital transformation journey. So my background is in IT and financial services mainly in private sector, but I also, before joining AWS, I used to be the Secretary of Digital Government for the government of Argentina. So that is my country, by the way. So the session today is about how open source applications can enable public sector organizations to accelerate their digital transformation reforms, their digital transformation journey. And we will learn from our panelists that are very experienced why organizations should consider to adopt, to use open source solutions, which are the benefits, which resources are available to facilitate that adoption, and they will share also some examples. They will share also their own experience in the challenges to adopt open source solutions. And especially, we are going to talk about the skills that we need and how to have the right talent on top. So with that, let me introduce our panelists. So we have Robin Scott. She is co-founder and CEO of Apolitical. Maybe you know that it's a global learning platform for government. She's investor and advisor to a number of mission-driven technology startups. She co-founded OneLeap, an executive education company, and several Southern African social enterprises teaching coding and other income generation skills to vulnerable women, youth, and prisoners. Robin is also an ambassador for the Access to Medicines Index and on the advisory board of the Responsible Mining Index. She grew up in Botswana and New Zealand, and she has a Bachelor of Science in Bioinformatics from Auckland University and a Master of Philosophy in Bioscience Enterprise from Cambridge University. She has been named one of Wired's 50 people about to change the world, and it's, I guess it was in 2012 maybe, and it's a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. So it's a privilege to have you here. We have Gayan Perizo here. He's the head of data and technology with Shift Digital Office at the United Nations Development Program, the one that you know as UNDP. He leads the implementation of the data strategy for UNDP, which includes driving the transformation of the own UNDP into a data-driven organization, and also advising member states on their data and digital strategies. Gayan is an expert in bringing people's voices into policy making. He has experience in digital campaigning and led data collection and analysis efforts of several global initiatives, such as, for example, the United Nations 75, UN 75, and My World, which brought in over 10 million voices worldwide through both public and private sector partnerships. Last but not least, we have Pete Hurley. He's the technical product manager and the open source lead in the government transformation team within AWS, same team as I am. Before joining AWS, Pete was the lead product manager at the Government Digital Service in UK, the one that you know as GDS, during 10 years. There, he delivered many of its biggest and most challenging successes, like, for example, the gov.uk website, that is a single website to replace around 3,000 separate government websites, the online voter registration for the very first time in the UK's history, the online petitioning of Parliament, the gov.uk notify a centralized email, text message, and letter service used by around 80% of public sector organizations in the UK. All of the above published as open source and most seen repeated used and reused by governments around the world. So with that, let me begin with the conversation. So Pete, when we talk about open source solutions, what we are really talking about? What makes an open source solution a good one? What does it really means to reuse?
Okay, so afternoon everyone. So open source software is really a fairly straightforward concept. So as long as the software that you have produced is published, publicly available, so usually a code repository, something like GitHub for those who are familiar. If you publish it, you put a license on it, which is basically just a small file that says you can use this, and you make it freely available to anybody to use for whatever they want. Right? They don't have to use it in any specific way that you've proposed, and they can do whatever they want with it, literally anything they want with it. They can become a competitor to you if that's what you want to do. Now, it's not tied to government. Anyone can do open source. So really all it is code, that software that you have produced and made available for others to reuse. So that's open source. Now, open source is everywhere, right? You probably don't even know you're using open source, but most of the software that's out there, whether it's proprietary software or open source software that you use, underneath will be using small open source components and libraries. Everything, just that you would struggle to find something that doesn't use open source components to build it. And that's incredibly common, very, very common. What is much less common is to see open source solutions. And by solution, I mean an entire product, right? So it could be something, certainly in the public sector space, government space, something that processes payments, a CRM, customer relationship management system. It could be something that does web publishing, but an entire system rather than the more granular, lower level components. That's much less common to see as open source. But it does happen, and we're definitely going to share some of those examples here today. So that's what an open source solution is, and what makes a good one, and certainly in my experience. And I've been on both sides of the fence with this. I've been looking for stuff to use, but I've also been lucky enough to be producing stuff that others have gone on to use. So I've done the desk time looking for solutions. So what we're looking for with a good solution, first of all, it needs to actually be open source, right? A lot of people think just because they put their code on the internet, put it on a code repository, that it's open source and anybody can take it, and that's just not right. There is a very specific license that you need to add. It's very simple to do so, but a lot of people don't do so. And unless you do add this simple license, then it is difficult, if not impossible, for somebody to be able to reuse your code. So that's a small thing, but a really important thing. The second thing is you want to find a solution that's proven, right? If someone's just come up with a brilliant bit of software and published it on the internet and made it open, doesn't mean it's going to be any good, right? There's a lot of dross out there. A lot of stuff that is published and is open source, but doesn't necessarily mean it's very good. So we definitely want to be looking for something that's been proven, i.e. it's been implemented successfully, ideally multiple times, so you know that you're investing in a proven product. Once you've got that, you're then looking at, okay, is this actually an active code repository? Is this an active software project? Because if it was built 5 years ago and no one's touched it since, then it's almost bound to be riddled with issues, right? And it's not going to be maintained moving forward. So we're looking to see if an open source solution is active in its development, active in its support. If you want to raise questions with the team, are they responsive to come back to you with it? And then finally, in terms of what makes it good, you want to see documentation, developer documentation, implementation guides, that sort of thing. Effectively, if it's been optimized for reuse, it's a great solution. And many people will make an open source solution, but if you want to reuse it, you have to really struggle to figure out how to get to the bottom of it, right? Digging between all the code to figure out how to install it, how to run it, what kind of dependencies you might need, what infrastructure you might need to run it on. So generally speaking, those are going to make a good open source solution. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to meet your needs, and that's obviously underpinning everything. You need to assess whether this thing meets your needs. But if it looks like it will, then those are kind of signals to look for. And then finally, when we talk about reusing or using an open source solution, that means you are using somebody else's code, right? Some code that somebody else produced or a group of people produced. And from there's two routes you can go. One is what we call forking the code, which is basically copy and paste, to put it into my terms I can understand. And that means I take the code as is, and I'm going to put it on, install it, and run it myself, and I'm going to take it in whatever direction I want to go. And it may be that I want to add features that are not necessarily in the system or not on the roadmap to be added to the system. It might be that I prefer to be in control of it, and that, there will be certain, I guess, optics of running your own code and running your own solution that certain governments and local government organizations will care about. But that's one option. At that point, you own the code, you're responsible for it. The other option is collaboration, which is where you work with the other organization that produced the code together to build and develop a code base, add the features collaboratively, and build a community around it. I should say that is very romantic. It's a lovely notion. It's incredibly hard to do. It's especially hard if it's an established product that somebody else wishes to join, because you kind of built it to your needs. They'll come in, and it becomes incredibly complicated to manage the priorities and the governance around it. Not impossible, but hard. So what we do see is where open source code and software and solutions are reused, it's typically the copy and paste route, and that tends to be more successful.
Thank you, Pete. We talk about the reuse of these open source solutions. The United Nations already has been advocating for the adoption of open source solutions. Is this promotion working, Ayan?
Well, thank you, Maria. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a simple question, but I believe that has a complex answer. Let me first tell you what United Nations is doing in this space as well. I believe when you talk about UN, one thing that comes to your mind is we work on peace initiatives, we work on climate change, we work on different initiatives around the world. But when it comes to open source technology, I believe that the values that both UN and open source are built are the same. That is openness, transparency, equity, and also collaboration. And these are the same values that the UN is built on as well. And this is highlighted in a UN resolution in 2021, highlighting how open source is the catalyst for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals as well. And the UN Secretary General recently released a digital roadmap for the world as well. And in that, as the second priority item, he has identified digital public goods, equitable digital public goods as well, as one of them. And I work for UNDP, the UN's development program. And if you take UN, there are multiple agencies, right? UNICEF, WFP. UN Development Program is the biggest development program on the ground. And I say on the ground, we are present in over 177 countries. And what we do at UN is actually, I'm in the Chief Digital Office running the digital transformation of UNDP, but it's not really for UNDP. It is building UNDP to help member states in their digital transformation journey, helping the governments. And we have a framework for that. And that framework is built on 5 pillars. People, their capacity, infrastructure, what people need, and also governments providing that leadership, and also regulation, which is needed for digital transformation, and also the business ecosystem as well. How can these solutions scale as well? And also, right at the core, we have whole of society inclusive digital transformation. Now, what does that mean? Because of the pressure recently, because of COVID, we've seen governments jumping into digital solutions, jumping into certain applications without thinking it through. Imagine you have this cool tech for online education. Okay, let's implement it. But what happens to people who don't have access to connectivity? Are we further marginalizing those people in the country? Do you have the business ecosystem to make use of what you're doing here? So if you take a government, there's government as a user, and also there's government as an enabler as well for others to succeed. I think future of government is moving towards that. So we are advising governments on this framework, on how to use this framework to take that whole of society approach. Now, it's one thing advising governments, what are we doing at UNDP? How do we practice what we preach? So I will talk about 3 areas. One is called the Digital Public Goods Alliance, and we are a member of Digital Public Goods Alliance. It's a multi-partner alliance formed to use open source technology for the global good. And there are about 349 exactly when I checked this morning, open source solutions out there, which has a governance mechanism as well. You need to have certain standard, Pete, that you talked about to get in as a digital public good. And what we are doing is actually promoting these digital public goods. Also, UN works with governments in procuring certain systems as well. So we are pushing towards those systems becoming digital public goods as well in the future. So setting at principle level that we are moving towards open source technology. And the second area is an initiative called Digital X, which helps, which identifies innovations that are happening in the field, and we give priority to innovations coming from the global south, and especially women-owned entrepreneurships as well. So I'll be sending some your way as well, Pete, for the awards. It's almost like an awards program. So that is another area. And the third area is really internal transformation, the data strategy I said that I'm driving. That on that one, earlier, as UNDP, we produce reports, we produce thought pieces, we produce blog posts. If you ask anyone in the past in UNDP, how did you come up with that analysis? They might probably say, oh, it's based on my education, based on the research, based on my intuition. No one would say it's based on this data. And we have completely changed that dynamic in the organization. For every report we produce, every analysis we do, every economic modeling that we do in a country is now based on data. And the beauty is we've completely opened up the data. So it's not just the economist that has access to that data, not just the data, the models as well. We have made it public. For me, personally, all my future is based on an algorithm someone has written. My creditworthiness for my dream home is based on an algorithm someone has written. For my wife to start her small business, her ability to get a loan is based on an algorithm someone has written. My eligibility for insurance is based on algorithm someone has written. So I want that algorithm to be open and transparent. And imagine applying this to a country. You want those policy decisions to be made on open, transparent data and algorithms and machine learning and AI systems. So they need to be open as well, which is what we are advocating. Now coming back to your question, Maria, how do we, is it successful? Now success, how do you define success? In the short term, you can define success saying this many people using an open source system, but in the longer term, it is about how many lives we've transformed using those systems. So certain things we can measure now, but there are certain things we will be able to measure in 5 years or 10 years' time, whether we are really making that transformative impact on the ground.
Totally agree. It's all about the impact that you are getting. So, Robin, we know that digital transformation is not about technology itself, it's about people, it's about culture, it's about skills. So how critical is for any public sector organization to invest in culture and skills to promote the open source adoption?
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you. That's such an important question. I should say I'm delighted to be part of this panel today for 2 reasons. The first is that open source is in Apolitical's DNA because we are galvanized by this incredible figure that McKinsey calculated, which is that if governments just did what was already working in other departments, cities, and countries, it would save $3.5 trillion a year. Incidentally, that's the additional amount of money we need to spend annually to reach net zero goals, according to another McKinsey calculation. So the gains if you adopt policy, if you open source policy, are enormous. So we're obsessed by how you unlock that hive mind of government, and we also try and practice what we preach. So we open source a lot of the code we work on and draw on a lot of great open source projects. And I should just say, what we are, the perspective I'm coming from is as a learning platform where it's really easy for any public servant to find and share best practice, and where it's really accessible and affordable for any public servant to develop key skills for 21st century government provided by by government expertise or top universities around the world. And I'm thrilled to be working with AWS on making some of those courses and AWS training accessible to government, and with AWS and the UNDP on celebrating the hidden heroes in government. Now, the second reason, which bridges to what I want to say about skills development, is that there's a particular opportunity that we're really interested in, which is to use skills and approaches to drive culture change in government. Anyone who's tried to change culture will know it's the hardest thing to do. And what's really interesting about some of the skills around 21st century government is they directly act on culture as well. And you can create a virtuous flywheel where you give skills, it improves the culture, which creates more hunger for learning. And so open source is an amazing example of an approach which drives a lot of, which requires a very particular culture, and where you can act on that culture through skills. And in preparation for this, I polled a number of our community members on what they thought were the kind of cultural tenets required for open source projects to work. And they came up with 9. And the really interesting aspect of those 9 is that only 2 of them can't be driven by skills development. So the 9 that they came up with, the first 2 are very difficult to do through skills. The first is working in the open by default. And the second is trust. It's very hard to share what you're working on if there's not a culture of trust. It's very hard to do a lot of things without a culture of trust. But in open source, it's very relevant. But the remaining 7 all involve skills. So there's a culture of R&D, rip-off and duplicate, and you can teach that. You know, there are lots of resources and best practices for doing that. There's designing with users, tons of great ways of teaching user-centered design. Collaboration, both local and international, to find these best practices. Again, that can be taught. Agility, iterate and improving, lots of best practice around that. Communication from the documentation end, the kind of hygiene and clarity, through to the influence that's required to bring people on board with these projects. And then sustaining communities and community management, because projects die on the vine if you don't have that. And then finally, there's excellence. If you want to put something out that others use and you want to helpfully critique what they do, you need to be good at your job. So 7 of those 9 can be taught.
Thank you. Thank you. So we are talking here about there are multiple solutions in government in open source that have been proven to be successful, but at the same time, we know that there are many governments that still are lagging behind their digital transformation. So are governments taking advantage of those open source solutions? Pete?
Shall I jump in on? Yeah, the answer is no. I think not enough. So I mentioned before, like, a lot of people are doing open source. There's a lot more organizations, governments who have decided they want to work in the open. They want to share the code that they're writing. And personally, I think taxpayers are funding the work of government. If nothing else, it's sort of an onus on them to share those assets they're creating. But there's a lot of open source creation, but there's very, very little open source reuse when it comes to solutions. It's not unheard of, and as I said, I've been involved in a number of use cases for that. but it's just not the same culture that a developer has at the moment. If they want a small open source library, I talked about the small components that everyone uses, it's just second nature. You go and find one, you research, you crawl the internet, you look for open source libraries that do things. You don't think twice about that, that's just what you do. And you do your hygiene measures, as I mentioned, is it maintained, all that good stuff. It's not controversial. But if you say to a government, oh, why don't you use the solution the French have made for tracking cattle movement? I don't know why I said cattle movement, but let's imagine there's lots of cows moving around France, and you want to track them. So that would be quite contentious. There'll be all sorts of issues, like a lot of myth and mythology around what those issues are, and often not real. But it's just not the default position that people have. And I would love where we got to the position where, rather than 204 countries creating something that sends text messages to their citizens, and worse than that, actually, 200 local government organizations in 200 countries. I'm not going to do the maths. Don't make me do the maths. Lots is the answer. But rather than that, let's make it a culture where people see something online, they find it, and there's no issue or hesitation to going and reusing that thing just because it wasn't made in their own backyard. So it does happen. Some products we've seen, and I'm going to talk about a product called GovQ Notify you mentioned. It was one I was lucky to be involved with. One thing that we did when we built that in the UK was we sort of did that optimization for reuse. We documented it well, we worked in the open, and in doing that it made it possible for people to A, find out about it, because there's a lot of open source solutions that are brilliant, but they're just hidden, right? No one talks about them, they don't know where to go to find them. And Digital Public Goods Alliance and the register there were brilliantly helpful, and Apolitical have resources. Like many organizations have resources. Here in AWS, we have a catalog called Open Government Solutions, which has a whole bunch of open source resources as well. So we're kind of putting in some effort to curate these lists amongst ourselves, where we're doing some of those hygiene checks. So we say, yeah, we know this is active, we know this is good, we know this is proven. So we want to bring those to our users as well. So yeah, Notify, A, making sure it's available and people are aware of it, and second of all, making sure that it can be picked up and reused relatively easily. You don't have to re-engineer the whole product, which kind of defeats the purpose of that. And the bit that's missing, and this is really key, I think this is probably the biggest takeaway for me, is we don't talk about how to reuse open source solutions. We talk about the open source solutions we've made, aren't we great, pat myself on the back, but we never really talk about, hey, I reused this solution. And actually, it's the lessons that come from that are so crucial. And it's the lack of information and lack of sharing of that information that I think prevents people and organizations from it becoming normal and becoming what we do on a day-to-day basis. So that's our challenge, I think, as an industry, as open source specialists and those passionate about it, is to do what we can to surface both the solutions that are hidden, but also the stories, so you can look at someone and say, hey, they're just like me, and they did it, and this is how they did it. And I'm going to give that a go now.
I would say that as a former person in government, the key is that question of not reinventing the wheel. It's so important just to try to add value and not to reinvent the wheel once and again, no.
Yeah, and just to add on that, I mean, there is also that other tension, which is everyone in government wants to be second, right? And no one wants to be first. So we talk about something being reused, being successfully. Yeah. Often it's not just that it's being used by the person who created it, but it's being reused once elsewhere. And as soon as you get those two, everyone's like, yeah, well, of course I want to be first. Do reuse that now. But that's a pretty standard government approach globally, I think.
Sure. And which are the real benefits of using open source solutions? Anyone can talk about that?
Well, in the UN, if I may go first, I think it's one of the real benefits is the minimum barrier to entry as well for open source software. And with that, you can build capacity. You can collaborate on software. So I think one of the biggest values of that is building ability to build the scalable applications for people to use.
Yeah, learning from others is built into the model, right? So you're adopting something that's already worked somewhere else, which comes with enormous cost savings, and I think that's where you're seeing some of the most exciting applications. Actually, there's an initiative called BA Obras in Argentina, where they've made open source a whole lot of the government's decision making, which has led to huge participation and increased awareness. It's now been spread around Latin America, where there's a real desire to do things with smaller budgets to get them off the ground, and open source does that. And to boot, probably because they've built that cultural muscle, they've actually adopted some open source work from Madrid around citizen engagement and launched 600 citizen participation projects. So I think that speaks to the enormous value of this approach.
Pete, any other comment?
Yeah, I mean, I could go for hours, but how long have we got?
He's passionate about open source.
5 hours per session. So, no, I mean, for me, the first, most obvious one you encounter first, just the speed that you can get the open source solution, right? You can use it that day. You find it, you can use it that day. You can install it, particularly if you've got, perhaps using cloud infrastructure, you can install it immediately, you can experiment, you can assess it. You don't have to spend 6 months doing procurement. You don't have to get into contract negotiations. There's none of that. So let alone that you didn't pay anything for the software, right? You are able to use it immediately. So speed to market is important. And we, during the earlier stages of the pandemic, we saw a huge amount of open source reuse because we had to, right? Necessity said, forget what we were hung up about using open source software. We have no choice. We have to use this thing because lives are at stake. So speed to market is definitely one. And then the last one, this one, no one, very rarely do people clock this one, and that is if a solution has got to the point where it's proven and it's in production and it's in use, there are literally thousands and thousands of hours of user research behind that. There's iterations upon iterations upon iterations. So you're not just getting some code, you're getting the patterns, you're getting the insights, the learnings that come with it. And it's all free, it's all free. We should not probably tell everyone, but it is all free. You're still gonna run the thing, and there's costs, of course there are, but the solution itself and all that insight and research is just there for you to go to.
Can I slightly challenge that? Not in the fundamental sense at all, but one of the reasons that we see open source go wrong a lot is because there's an assumption that it's totally free. And as a colleague who ex-government likes to say, it needs to be nurtured like a puppy, and governments forget that, and that leads to this very negative cycle where the communities who could be building on what's being created get annoyed, so it's not evolved, it becomes stale, and then government thinks, well, this isn't improving like I was promised, and then it goes back to the old solutions. So the free is a little bit of a trap. It's kind of free with a few caveats, maybe.
That's fair, that's fair.
And that maybe got my attention. And what is this for the vendors? Is there any place for vendors to work in this environment?
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, so I do a lot of work in my day job, working with vendors to promote open source solutions, ones that we build here in AWS, but also ones that governments around the world have successfully delivered. So the vendor model, and there's an array of options, but what we typically see, and this is true of many products you'll see, private sector as well as in government, where the solution itself is open source. Here you go. You can take it. You can do what you wish with it. You can do this with products like WordPress, right, which hosts 60 or 70% of the world's websites, right? It's free. It's open source. It's not free. It's open source. So that's available. But if you want a hosted version of this, we will host it for you. We'll provide you a managed service. We'll provide the support. And what you get by having that combination is you get the product out there. It's well known. There's a low barrier to entry. Back to your point, I can start on a kind of no risk basis here. I don't have to go to any effort. I can I can try it for myself as open source, or I can try your managed service. And if I'm happy with it, and then maybe I want to run my own instance because it's going to be more cost effective at scale. And we would do some of that stuff in government. I would build products in government, and I would consume kind of as a service type offerings to get the stuff up and running, knowing that that cost model wasn't sustainable at scale, and over time we would then look to take the open source software and build on that. So yeah, there's absolutely a strong market. I think it helps products awareness rise when there's an open source variant. I spoke to someone recently I was talking about what their motivation for bringing their product to open source was. And they said, so quite frankly, the VCs, the venture capitalists, look upon you very favorably if your product is open source, because that's the model that is proven. So there's a lot in it for the vendors, and in fact, I would argue that making your product open source is probably going to lead to it being more successful than less so.
But do you think that, and especially you, Robin, that open source software means that you need an in-house development team dedicated with a profile, with skills, with experience? Is that a kind of a barrier for any public sector organization that wants to adopt open source?
You usually need some team. I mean, you can spin things up immediately, but if you want to develop them further, you would need some in-house capability, but you would need much less than if you were building it from scratch. And that team can be focused on the things you really need, and it's constantly enriched and supported by a community working on the software. So it's net still so much better. And I think it's good for government to keep a certain level of capability in-house anyway. But one of the issues that costs a lot of government, it saves them money in the short term, but costs them over the long run, is if they lose all the in-house capability, because then they don't have the people who understand what they should be using.
And do we have any kind of lesson learned or kind of failure in using open source solutions somewhere?
Yes, Maya, some things that keeps me up in the night, actually. If I think about some other calls I've been getting or emails I've been getting on some other failures in systems, I can broadly categorize them into maybe three. So there are certain issues on usability, because you just adapted the technology without designing it with the users, for the users' need as well. So there's a problem in uptake in the system. And the second type of issue is the scalability as well, because the pillars that I talked about in the digital transformation were not thought about. You have the technology, you introduced a system. I have to say this is not unique to open source. This is across the proprietary systems as well. You introduced a system, but the policy framework is not there, or the people's digital capacity is not so much, they don't understand it, or the government doesn't have a leader to lead on it, or what you instead of enabling it, you've just implemented the system, so the business community cannot innovate on top of it. So when it comes to scaling, there are issues. Then the third type of issue I get is mainly on security aspects as well. Sometimes goes back to what Robin said. If these open source solutions need to be rooted in an institution that governments change all the time, right? So you need to find an institution where you build this local capacity. Sometimes someone is accountable for maintenance as well. So therefore these systems are maintained, the modules are updated, the security patches are added to the systems. So this goes into the capacity building question that you asked, Robin, as well.
And maybe we can share some good examples, very good examples. Pete, do you have one, two that come up to your mind quickly?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll talk about things I know rather than things I've heard about. And so, I talked about the notifications platform in the UK, which has gone on to be used by Australia, by Canada, by the Veterans Affairs Department here in the States, Brazil, Montenegro, and there's more, I think, California Digital Service as well. And that has been one of the more incredible success stories. What I've seen as well is the reuse of solutions is much more common when it's a real commodity utility service provision. So if it's something that everything needs, right? Everything needs probably a messaging. Many things need payments. Many things need a design system to help package the design together. Those tend to be the things that are they're foundational service components, and they tend to be more successful when it comes to reuse around the world. It's not to say that kind of point solutions that are very specific business solutions. There was one recently with the team we worked on that would analyze a cough pattern over a phone. So you could use a WhatsApp integration, this is from Argentina, and it could tell you with a pretty high degree of certainty whether you had COVID or whether you had other kind of respiratory illnesses. In fact, even a higher degree for influenza and such like that. And so, the solutions are there. They can be very specific, very niche, but simply to say that where it's most common, it kind of makes sense, where it's a utility thing on which many services can use, rather than each of those services building those foundational service components.
Yes, and in this work doing advisory for government transformation, we learned that the needs from government are more common, or they have so similarities that it has a lot of sense to share knowledge, to share piece of software, no?
Yeah.
And what about how can we make this happen? Incentives, tools, education. What can we do to promote more? And I am looking to Robin. This stuff.
Again, I come back to the rewarding piece. So many people in government are doing amazing work, and you never hear about them, they never recognize. We have to reward those hidden heroes. So awards like we're working on, I think, are hugely important. You might speak a bit more to that. And then giving people the skills, giving them the right places to start. Once you have got some of the key skills and you know where to look, the amazing thing with open source is there's so much generosity, there's so much knowledge out there to hold your hand as you work on a project, that it's crazy not to lean into it, but you need that initial impetus. And then I think there also needs to be awareness at the highest level in government. It is such a no-brainer to do more of this. And yet there is so much less being done than there could be. And I think the drum needs to be beaten again and again with the most senior people.
Yeah, this is that working in the open, right? Like, it just needs to be not unusual and not rare. And then people can point, oh, they did it. Yeah. Oh, well, we can do it. So the more we talk about open source, so that's really only one part of it. And working in the open is key. If you're, blogging about what you're doing, sharing successes and failures, and the second part is really important for building trust. Otherwise, so many corporate blogs are just PR mouthpieces, frankly. You want to share the successes and failures of what you're learning along the way. And that's really engaging and builds trust. And people can point at this and say, they did it, here's what they learned, here's where they went wrong, so we can avoid that, and I'm now more comfortable. And the more that becomes commonplace, the more likely I think it is that we're going to see that level of the uptake and reuse of these solutions.
Robin was telling about the award that we are working on. Can you share a little
That's
bit more?
That's a very, very conveniently timed question. Yeah, so I mean, it is a massive coincidence that we happen to be here today, but we also, we have common purpose in trying to promote and raise the profile of open source. And, from our perspective here in AWS, we are trying to help certainly the lower to middle income countries especially, but really get started with their modernization. That lets them better meet the needs of our citizens, and it gives us an opportunity to help them modernize. And at some point we can help them to do that. They might spend some money with AWS. Great, but we don't need to push that. We just need to help them get started. So we want to find the hidden heroes. We want to find the hidden software. We want to find the stories of reuse. And so we're teamed up together. We're launching, it's evolving. This is a sneak peek, so don't tell anyone. And if you're on the live stream, close your ears. So we are launching the Future of Government Awards. It's futureofgovernment.com. You can have a look at that. That is going to do that celebration. We're going to find these people. It's a global awards. We're working together to uncover these great stories and great people, great products, and we're going to promote them. We're going to share them with the world. And that's a little bit of maybe the least we can do, really, to try and help stimulate that path to it becoming normal, and actually, frankly, to becoming a point where you're almost negligent to not go down that route, right? It's so obvious that you should be. And we changed that. We changed the decision from do we build versus buy, right? Everyone's probably heard build versus buy as a typical first day question. But then it should become do we reuse, do we build, do we buy, right? And reuse should be the first. And to some extent, that's happening a little bit already. The European Commission and Italy both have legislation at the country level that says public sector organizations have to explore reuse before they're allowed to build or buy, right? And so this is going to just get more and more, and the noise and the drumbeat will get louder and louder. And it's an exciting time for open source, for sure.
That's very true. There are many governments that are trying to push the use of open source solutions. And do you think that maybe Gaian or Romin, that this culture is something you can can be educated at the university level, or it's just kind of learn by experience, walk the talk, and no more than that?
I personally think it's kind of experiential, on-the-job learning. You can only be taught so many principles.
Interesting.
I think so as well, because like I said, so many decisions are made based on the government implemented systems these days as well. So this is that consciousness, that awareness about these values that needs to happen from a very early age.
Interesting. Have you experienced, and maybe Pete, for you, any concerns for one country reusing open source software developed by another country? Let's see, maybe concerns around data sovereignty or this type of things?
Certainly heard of them, yeah, for sure. I mean, you probably heard more than I have, so you're probably better to speak to this. I have heard of them. They're real. I think the thing about open source solutions is if you want that code and you want to then operate your own instance of that code on your shores, in your data center. I mean, don't run a data center, but if you really want to, you can do that, right? The code is transparent, and people are like, oh, we don't know, it's open source, security. The code is, frankly, I suspect, more secure because of its transparency and openness, and there are more eyes on it, more contribution to it, that you can have whatever degree of security you want, you can host it locally. So I think it's a bit of a red herring to talk about, data sovereignty and these sorts of things, because you're in control and you make the choices.
Yeah. Any other thoughts from you?
I think one of the great things about open source in government is there are, for the most part, no competitive barriers to sharing in government. There are a few military examples where there are, but it's not zero-sum like it can be in the corporate world. So it's not generally the biggest problem one confronts, and it's one of the big opportunities.
Yeah.
And in your experience, Gaian?
No, absolutely. What Pete said, it's an opportunity than a problem, because you're in control of the system that you're implementing. So the things that you want to control can be controlled.
Good statement, just a title. So, just to begin to wrap up on all the such interesting messages that we have been sharing here, Romin, want you to maybe share your main thoughts?
My 30-second thoughts. Government is for the public good. It's funded by taxpayer dollars. There is, I think, a moral imperative to use the fastest, most cost-effective solution and to invest in things that benefit everyone, that uplift individuals, businesses, the wider ecosystem. And it is very doable, as we've discussed. It's the culture and the skills it requires are key to digital government in general. They are teachable if they're combined with practical learning on the job. We know how to do all this. There's tons available. It, to me, is absolutely inevitable and essential.
Thank you. Gaian?
Well, for me, it goes back to my earlier message as well. If you are a startup or if you are a well-established company, and or they are doing open source or proprietary software, think about the values. Think about integrating those values into your business model as well. When you talk about success about the company, don't talk about number of users who adopted the system, but think about the impact you made in a country, in a government, the impact you made on people's lives. That should be your business model. That's my message.
Thank you. Pete?
Yeah, I think just let's make it easy for governments to point at another case. Let's find stuff for them to go, well, it's been done, I'm second, I'm happy. Like, they're out there, we just need to find them. I think it's going to come quickly, right? The first few, they'll get momentum, and then all of a sudden you will be the negligent person for having not looked at it. So let's do that initial push. Let's find this great work that's out there, these great people, these great examples of reuse, and make it hard for governments not to do the right thing.
Yeah. So today we learned a lot around this topic of open source solutions, and we learned about how many solutions are there. We, as public officers, should be daring to use that to promote the usage of those solutions. The key message is reuse. There are plenty of things already there that has been developed, a lot of investment behind the scenes on those pieces of software, and at the same time you can leverage upon that, take advantage of delivering at speed with experience, and also maybe adding your own value to that solution, and maybe continue building upon that. So is there a question of skills, of education, of culture that we need to promote? Yes, it is. We need to work on that. But again, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You can learn from others, and you can take advantage also of the experience of other countries, of other teams that have been doing that, and take advantage of the incentives also. This message of the award that we are going to launch in the short term is also a very good initiative to promote the open source solutions. Just for you to know, if you want to learn around AWS Cloud Skills, you have plenty of tools. Here you have some of them. And also, I would like to thank you a lot. Please, as Pete, invite all of you to see the site for the award. If you can repeat the...
futureofgovernment.com.
Thank you. Please don't forget to complete the session survey in the mobile app. And thank you so much for being here. We will be outside if you want to ask any question to our panelists. More than happy to help to all of you. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.